My man, Frankie. How are you, sir? And I have been looking forward to this for I don't know how long, and thank you.
Thank you. And don't call me Frankie because you don't know me as Frankie.
I know.
So it seems and feels weird when you call me Frankie.
Good call. I didn't know if it went that way. So to let folks listening out there, I know you as Tony.
Mm-hmm. So my middle name is Anthony, and that's what I go by back in Detroit.
Right.
Is Tony. I've never been called Anthony. I mean, from birth, it's been Tony. So
right.
If you're calling me Tony, I know that that's someone from my Detroit scene.
Gotcha.
Like, if you're calling me Frankie, then it's when I moved from 92. That's kind of when I moved from Detroit,
right.
Getting the radio career started, to now. So I was Frankie.
Exactly. But I always wondered, do you get confused? But now it's so comfortable when someone calls either name, you answer to it automatically.
Yeah, but it feels weird if somebody like you calls me Frankie, and it would feel weird if my wife Tammy called me Tony. And she's done that before because my mom, who you know, lives 5 minutes. I brought my mom and dad out about 5 years ago, and since I've lost my father, but brought him out from Detroit. So my mom calls me Tony,
right.
And then sometimes when she's over for dinner and she'll say, she's talking, and then Tammy will say, well, I was talking to Tony the other. I'm like, my mom knows that I'm Frankie and Tony. Don't call me Frankie or Tony because of my mom. It just sounds and feels weird.
And I do the same thing. I go back and forth, and forever I refuse to call you Frankie.
Yeah.
And now I'm getting more comfortable with it because when we're out in public, it's Frankie, Frankie, Frankie.
And I don't. It just feels weird.
And I don't want to switch you up.
Yeah.
And now I know that.
And listeners know that they know that I go by, because I'm very open with that. I go by Tony in Detroit. So people that, know me from growing up in Detroit. So I've got friends back there, my buddy Keith, and you know Keith, and
right.
He calls me Tony, and all my friends and family back in Detroit, they call me Tony. And they know. So everybody knows and listeners know. So it's not like it's a secret or anything.
All right. Well, let's do this. Let's back up a little bit. And I think your listeners have heard our story a million times, and some of my friends have, but they've probably heard it in 5 to 8 minute chunks.
Right.
Let's back up a little bit, and I'll tell how I got to that place, and when you came in, you jump in.
Mm-hmm.
I started working at Dunham Sporting Goods. I took a quote-unquote semester off school, and immediately the manager quit, and I ended up being promoted to manager.
And let me interrupt you. So it's Lincoln Park, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit.
Exactly.
Where we're both from, Detroit or suburbs of Detroit. So just kind of giving a little.
Correct. Walk us through it.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. And I started working there just as a part-time job as a sporting goods store, and as a 19-year-old kid, that's awesome because you get a discount on tennis rackets and golf clubs and everything else.
And what year was it?
Oh,
when you started?
87?
Okay. That's when I started, I guess, shortly after you then.
Yeah, so 6 months before you started,
right.
I started. It was a lot of fun. All the people were in the same boat as me. They were either going to school or out of school, and we went out and had a lot of good times, and I ended up being the manager, got a little responsibility, had no idea what I was doing. And you got hired and told everybody you were 16.
Right. I was 15 and a half or 15 and 3/4 or whatever. I didn't have my license. Let's just say that.
Yeah, which was fantastic because what happened was you got hired. I loved you because you were a hard worker and enthusiastic, a little enthusiastic sometimes. But
it was? What do you mean by that?
You get nervous.
Oh,
you get nervous. You'd run the register or something, and
it's called neurosis. I'm neurotic, so it's that. Yeah.
Got you.
Yeah.
So, but absolutely fantastic, and that's funny. Neurosis. I'm going to go back to that because you immediately said, "What do you mean by that?"
Yeah.
So,
I'm picking it apart. Like, what are you trying to say? Say what you mean. Don't make me where I walk away with it going, what did he mean by that?
That's great.
Yeah.
So now we'll clear it up. Long form podcast. We can go as long as we want.
Okay.
And you came on. Fantastic. You and Chris Thomas, we'll give him a shout out because we were friends with him on Facebook, our drummer buddy.
Yeah, Rush fan.
Yeah, big
fellow
time.
Rush fan. He's a huge Neil Peart fan.
Big time. He just posted a picture that he had long hair. He looked like Chris Cornell, didn't he?
I saw that. He's awesome.
Which we won't even go into a sidetrack with Chris Cornell right now. It still breaks my heart. So, you know, we're working together, and I find out you're not 16 because I called you in for work one day when I really needed you, and you go, well, I can't get there right away, and I'm just jump in your car and drive over. And you go, well, I don't have my license, and Michigan was 16 at the time to get your license. I go, what do you mean you don't have your license? And you're honest to a fault. You go, well, I'm not really 16
yet.
I'll get a ride.
Yeah, and that was the thing. I couldn't get a ride from my mom or dad or even my brother at the time. So that was, you know, but they were dropping me off. That was.
Yeah, and I want to say we came and picked you up.
You might have. Yeah.
Chris and I came and got you. But
I think you did.
Yeah,
Good call.
that one time. So we came and picked you up, and that was great. You were working, and we had a fantastic time. And I was 5 years older, which is an eternity in 15 to 19 years old.
Yeah.
But that is how we met.
15 to 20, by the way. I'm not a math
I
whiz, but I want to say.
I want to say I was 20. I'm trying to give myself a half year
20,
on you.
Yeah. 5 years.
I hear you. And we worked there a while, and then I went off and worked somewhere else, and we were friendly after that. But slowly, as you do when you start working other places, we drifted apart. So we're 16 and 20 years old. 21 years old, if we're going to be correct in math. And I get another job, and then within a year of that, working for the airline, I get a transfer to Reno, Nevada.
So this is about, let's see, so that I'm 18 at this point. So I graduate, or I'm just about to graduate. I'm just about ready to go to broadcasting school in Detroit, Specs Howard Broadcasting.
Right, shout out.
Specs Howard School of Broadcast Arts is what the official name of it. Well, I don't even know. Maybe they've changed it since then. But yeah, so I remember when you got the job at Southwest, and we lost you as a manager. So I was like 18. So I was still working there at Dunham's. Then you leave. And we got a new manager at that point. And I got to say that, and I've talked about this on the air before, when I got that job, and here I'm this neurotic 15-year-old kid, I'd had a paper out up until, you know, from the age of 11 to 15. So I was a hard worker, but I didn't know the sales world at all. At all. So I remember learning, like, you kind of took me under your wing and taught me, you know, so I knew obviously some sporting goods, and we were in the games department, so we handled, like, you know, baseball and tennis, and we had the golf department, and, you know, and
darts
and bowling balls and all that. So I kind of knew a little bit, but I didn't know enough to sell this stuff. So I remember you kind of taught me along the way, and you remember we didn't work on commission. We had no commission.
Right.
So there wasn't that kind of incentive like spiffs or commission to sell the products, but there was that, I don't know, just I loved the what you had taught me, and that is, you know, you learn as much as you can about that product, whether you use it or not, learn about it, and then when you're passionate about talking about the product, you're selling it. And I remember that, and I was like, and I became, I think, pretty good at selling things that, like, I'd never golfed. To this day, I have never golfed. Like, I've been kicked off a golf course before in '95 and working in radio, and that was it was a promotion that we were doing, and a total side note or whatever. But I've never, ever golfed a day in my life. But I was selling at the time in 1987, and we're a discount sporting goods store. So we had, you know, cheaper products, but we still had some golf clubs. You remember the Spalding set, like the full men's, whatever, right-handed set, however many, 11-piece, it was like $999.
The links.
And the links. And we had some putters, some of the, you know, the nicer putters that we, you know, I can't remember what's like the big.
We didn't have Odyssey and everything back then, but they had Wilson and everybody else. So they were
ping putter. We
had
the
putter.
Ping. That was kind of upper end. But I was selling these things, and I wouldn't say that I didn't golf. I would just talk like I golfed, or certain, you know, sports that I didn't play.
Right.
And I was able to sell it. But I got that from you. So I've talked about that before. I got how to sell, you know, from you. And you would say, just kind of immerse yourself. We would get literature from whatever company it was, whatever product it was.
Right.
And we'd have to do, and this is pre-internet, obviously, it's 1987. So you would just get whatever they would send, and you would learn about the product, and that way you would talk it. And then it was kind of like, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. So I'm not telling you that I don't golf, but you know what I mean?
Right.
But I'm not really saying that I golf either.
Yeah, and I think I remember, just don't lie.
Yeah,
just
and I never lied, but like I said, I didn't,
because you'll get caught.
Right, and I didn't say that I golfed, but I, you know, didn't tell him that I didn't golf either. So
Now, was Mr. Bob still there when you were there?
No.
He was like an 80-year-old gentleman?
I came in when Bill, so Bill Merrifield.
Bill was the manager, but we had a salesman in sporting goods.
I don't think
his name is Mr. Bob, and he worked part-time.
I think I knew about him, but I don't think I knew him.
And he was 80 years old, and I remember getting hired and going, oh, my gosh, at 1920, going, why is this decrepit old guy here? And the manager, just like I told you, stop and listen.
Yeah.
I used to watch that guy go into anywhere, and people walked out with something.
Right.
And he didn't lie. He was this sweet old guy that just went in and said, hey, you know, here's what it is. You know, obviously I'm 80 years old. I don't use this 200-pound dumbbell set, but here's what other people have said, and so on and so forth. And it just, he was phenomenal, happy, no pressure, and people loved the guy. So, you know, I left, I went away, I moved away, and, you know, as you do as a young man, you think, oh, I'll stay in touch with everybody. And you don't.
Yeah. Well, it's like
pre-cell phone, pre-internet.
Pre-everything.
I will tell you something that I regret to this day is, you remember Jim Powers?
I do.
And him and Mary got married, and I got a call and a voicemail, and I called back forever. They wanted me to be in the wedding party, and I couldn't get a hold of them, and I missed out, and I regret to this day I have not talked to him since.
What year was that?
That would have been...
Early 90s?
91.
91, okay.
Yeah, 91-ish. So I lived out in Reno and in remote and Lake Tahoe area and had a fantastic time and moving out, living out west in mountains. And I will tell you something about growing up, which I needed, is I went from Detroit to Reno, small little Reno, Nevada, and I hadn't been there. And I remember flying into the town. I had bought a car halfway in Denver with my brother, and I was going to fly back and pick it up. But I had never been to Reno, and I landed in Reno, and I looked out the plane window, and I said, where's the rest of it? Oh, no.
Yeah.
And for the first 6 months, I thought I was going to jump out a window. I had dark clothes, club clothes.
Z-Cavalry.
And it's the early 90s.
Yeah.
It's the early 90s, and everybody's in a flannel shirt and boots and shorts. Just the grunge was starting to kick off. And...
plus, that's the lifestyle. You're in Reno.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're hiking, you're biking.
They don't know about grunge. They're like, we don't care. This is what we've been wearing since flannel came out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, in Lake Tahoe especially, tons of money up at Lake Tahoe. We can talk about that later. But I got out there, and another life lesson I learned or self-taught is I got to 6 months, and I was ready to shoot myself. And actually, now that I remember this, I was flying home, and I had to fly through Las Vegas, and I was in the lounge having a drink, and I was talking to a waitress in the airport lounge, and just general conversation. It was slow, and she said, you know what? I went through the same thing when I moved to Vegas from Chicago or wherever she was from.
Culture shock.
And I was ready to just jump off a cliff. I didn't know what to do with myself, and I sat down, and I got a calendar out, and I marked 6 months out. Then I would not make a decision for 6 months about what I wanted to do. I would commit. Mm-hmm. And then I marked every month on a calendar where I would try something new.
Nice.
And I did the exact same thing. And that's great advice. And I could have moved, but it'd be given up, I felt like.
Right.
So I did this with a calendar, and I bought a mountain bike. I bought a backpack. I ended up starting to skydive. I did everything you could think of outdoors, and I looked down at the calendar, and it was 8 months later, and I thought, I'm never leaving the mountains.
Wow.
I'm never leaving West. So that was kind of my intro to that, and then years later, that semester off turned into 8 years. But I did go back to school, and I got my degree, and right before I got my degree in Reno, I met my wife. And we as a couple...
what year is this?
This is 96, 97.
Okay.
So 97-ish. And I ended up getting a promotion with Southwest to a quality control position where I didn't have to work in the station, but I had to move to Los Angeles, Las Vegas, or Phoenix. That was my territory, Southern California, Nevada, and Arizona.
She was working at Southwest at the
She
time?
was a flight attendant.
Okay.
I met her flying through. I used to always flirt with the flight attendants, and I like to joke she's the only one that said yes.
That's funny.
So we moved to Phoenix, and didn't know anybody, but we moved down to Phoenix, and Phoenix was great. And flash forward a few years, I changed jobs, left, got in the tech industry because we both worked at the same company.
Hold on. Who said I love you first in the relationship?
I'm not telling you.
It was you, wasn't it?
Probably. Don't tell her that. So we moved to so I'm in the tech industry, but that crash happened, and I ended up taking a few different jobs, and I wanted to always be able to make money. So I've got a certification to sell cell phones. I made a commission off those. I started selling communications. I got my real estate license. I did project management. I was doing everything I could, and I had 9 different jobs.
Wow.
And I was also selling real estate, and I had 5 signs, and I had 4 in yards, and my wife was from Utah, and we kind of joked around, and I said, I'm going to put a sign in our yard while you guys are out of town for the weekend. At this point, I have 2 kids. And if we sell it, this is Wednesday, if we sell it by Monday for way over what we want, we'll move to Park City. And I threw a sign in the yard. I threw it on MLS. And before the next morning, I had it sold full price. And I had to move. I had to back up my words. Because Arizona real estate was going crazy. And
I remember that year, yeah.
Oh, and I didn't have the money to buy a house, and they wanted me out in 3 weeks, and it was crazy. So we looked at houses, Park City, it fell through, and I ended up in Cottonwood Heights, which is a small little town, which is leading to how we ended up reconnecting. Now, what's that timeline now? So we're going from 87 to 97, so we're 10. I lived there.
So when did you move to, I guess the question is, when did you guys make the move to Utah?
So that would have been about 2001, 2002.
Okay, that sounds about right. And then when we mysteriously reconnected, you had been living there for, 3 or 4 years at that point? I know you were there for at least 3 years.
I was there 6 months.
Because I remember having that conversation.
We were in a house, and we were moving to Park City and ended up not in Park City because the deal fell through. And my wife found this house in Cottonwood Heights, which is down in the valley, which I said, I never want to live in the valley. I want to live up in Park City in the mountains. If we're going to live in a mountain area, I want to live in the mountains.
And that's between, for people that don't know, or maybe you do know that area, but Little and Big Cottonwood Canyon. You're like right in the middle of the 2 canyons.
On a bench.
Yeah,
so there's a valley, and then it goes up to a bench, if you will, a flat area, and then right against the mountains.
Yeah.
And kind of where you live, but a little more east,
right.
Which leads into I'm there 3 years. My kids are home. They're old enough to watch themselves. My wife's out of town. I go to a little golf tournament that's nearby just to watch, and I come home, and I grab my mail, and besides my mail, there's a little handwritten note. I look at the note, and it says, hey, I don't know... Oh, you're going to have to say exactly what it said, but hey, hopefully you remember me. This is Tony from Dunham's.
The Big Ragu.
The Big Ragu.
Yeah. Because that was a nickname that you called me.
Nickname. Everybody had a nickname when we were kids, of course. And then I had your number, so I gave you a call on them. It was like, so we're at 20 years now, and it felt like not 10 seconds.
Right. Well, we didn't skip a beat, like reconnecting. So this is bizarre. So talking about, losing contact from 89 to that point, right? So I knew that you went off to Southwest, and I heard that you moved out west, but that was kind of the extent of it. So all the years go by. Then I'm out here. I moved out here in October of 97. So I started with the radio station 97.1 ZHT in October of 97. So we're here for a bit. Now, at the time, I was married to my ex-wife, and had at that time when we reconnected, we were divorced, and so she had moved back to Florida. Now she's in Atlanta, and she's remarried, and she's doing great. But so at the time when I reconnected with you, I was with my ex-fiance when I'm married to my wife Tammy now. So yes, I've got kind of a
little bit of change.
A little bit, yeah.
Little
exactly.
history there.
Little history. But yeah, so I'm getting ready on that. I'll never forget this. On that Saturday morning to run some errands, and one of the errands I was going to run over to this bank that is close to. It's like in between your house and my house, and I just for whatever reason. And it was right around when, I don't know how long Google's been about, but Google was not like Google is now.
So it's pre-Google.
No, it's not pre-Google. Google was there.
Google's there, but it's pre-Facebook.
Yeah.
And it's LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Is about the only social network there is other than Yahoo Messenger and something, if you happen to be on the same Yahoo Messenger or and AOL or...
I'm glad you mentioned the LinkedIn thing, because I had... signed up for that, I don't know, whenever, like maybe a couple years prior, but I never used it. It just it wasn't conducive for what I was doing, and I just thought,
Sure.
So I did sign up for that. So when I got onto Google, which, again, wasn't anything like Google is now, but it was a search engine, and, so I decided, you know what, I'm getting ready to leave, and I'm like, I wonder what Doyle Sheets is doing, what he's up to, because I haven't, just for whatever reason, the name popped in my head, and I put it in Google. So the address pops up, and the zip code is 84121, and that is at the time I'm in the house that I'm in now in Holiday, so it's a different zip code, but I still have the house that my wife and I got.
Right.
So at the time it's a rental property, so 84121 comes up when I signed into that LinkedIn. A few years prior, I was signing in under that. I was in that
Correct.
property, so I was in that zip code. So here is your name, Doyle Sheets, your address, and it's, Salt Lake City, Utah, but which, that's still Cottonwood Heights, but it doesn't come up Cottonwood Heights, but 84121 is Cottonwood Heights, and I know that, and I thought, well, wait a minute, it must be pulling information, especially that zip code, from my LinkedIn or something. That's the only thing that would make sense to me. I'm like, this has got to be the wrong address, but wait, there's an address that I know the area, that it's not an address that I recognize, but I know the area. That's like 5 minutes from the house that I moved into when we moved out here. But there's got to be an explanation for that 84121. It just didn't make sense to me. But I'm like, well, wait a minute. That is a real address, and it's his name. And how many Doyle Sheets are out there? Really? I mean, it's like probably you.
Not many.
You and maybe one other guy. That's stealing your identity right now as we speak.
Exactly.
So I just decided, like, okay, I'm going to run by the bank, and I know exactly the area that this is. Again, it's 5 minutes from, that little area that I lived in, and it's like 8 minutes from where I'm living. So you're close. You're like 4 miles away.
Maybe. Yeah, exactly.
So I decided to drive. I found the house, and it's right, at the end of this cul-de-sac, and there's the house, and okay, I knock on the door. Nobody answers, so if your kids were home, that's good. They didn't answer the door, which is a good thing, right? Because they're home alone. So nobody answers, but your neighbor is out, and I'll never forget this. So she's out kind of in her driveway, and I'm thinking, okay, I need to stay back here on the street because this is going to seem weird. But I'm like, excuse me, is your neighbor, his name Doyle? And she said, yeah. And I said, last name Sheets? She said, yeah. And I said, is he like 6'1", 6'2"? Yeah. And I said, do you know if he went to because he went to Central, right?
Right.
So
CMU.
So I said, do you know if he went to Central? And I know at first I said, do you know if he's from Michigan? She said, yeah, I think so. Do you know if he went to Central? I said, I know this sounds weird. And then I said what was going on, and I kind of gave her, the brief of the connection, and she's just at this point looking at me like, okay, weirdo. Go away. But I'm thinking, this sounds like you. So I said, I'm just going to leave a note for him in his mailbox. I think it's this guy that I used to work with back in 1987 when we first met in Detroit at the sporting goods store. So I'm giving her the long and skinny of this without being, creeping her out. So I put the note in there, decided to, hey, Doyle, it's Tony. And, if this is you, here's my number. And, Big Ragu, if you don't remember the name,
right.
So giving you all this stuff. And, yeah, I'll be damned if you didn't call me right away, and it turned out that you were living 3-4 miles away for like 3 or 4 years, and we had no idea.
No clue. And I had listened to you probably 100 times on 97.1.
No,
yes.
I think you did.
Yes.
Because you said that you'd listened to satellite.
I said I listened to satellite, but I listened to 97.1. I was learning my stations when I got there, and I'm like,
okay.
oh, pop music. My kids like this. All right, cool. There's one station. So it was programmed in on my
okay.
radio.
So you had heard and you just didn't.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. So we're flashing forward a little bit. So I get, we play phone tag for probably 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we're so close, you're working or I'm out of town.
Right.
And we can't figure it out. So I look up Jessica's email on the radio station, which is your sidekick on 97.1. And I send her an email and say, hey, I don't know if this is a good idea, bad idea, whatever, but I'm old friends with Tony, Frankie. And she goes, of course, you guys he's been talking about finding you on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, he has? Fantastic. Like, how about I just come in the station and say hi? And she said, fantastic idea. Come on in. And I had no idea. I had never been on the radio. I had no clue. I was scared, and it was also 5 a.m., and I showed up and sat in the green room, and then they walked me in, and big ragu, and then you asked me questions, and I was nervous, and even though I answered honestly, they were funny answers.
Mm-hmm.
You had asked about my parents, and I said, they're not here anymore, and you guys took that to mean that they had died. And I'm like, no, they just don't live here.
They're down in Arizona.
Yeah, they're down in Arizona now, not in Michigan.
Right.
So, and made goofy like I listen to satellite, even though I'm sitting on a radio station of my, one of my bestest buddies, and not supporting them. I'm just brain dead.
It's all right.
There's a microphone, there's headphones, and I have no idea what I'm doing. But we immediately that weekend went out and had beers, had a great time, started skiing together, started snowboarding, started doing everything together, and I couldn't have been more pleased that I had a Detroit homie to hang out with that got my really dark sense of humor and cynical sense of humor and locked doors and didn't trust people and
you're speaking. It's like you're like talking in a mirror. Like I'm looking in the mirror. That's what I feel like. Yeah.
Like everything the out west people don't do.
Right.
Hey, leave the keys in the car. It's fine.
Yeah.
Leave the baby in the back. They'll be fine.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, whatever. So it was fantastic, and for years. And then, unfortunately, my mother and father started to get elderly and in poor health, and they lived in southern Arizona and could not we needed to get them closer. It was a hour-and-a-half flight and a 6-hour drive to get to them if anything happened, and things were starting to happen. So I cut a deal with my parents to move to Phoenix area, Mesa, Arizona, and they moved into senior living, and I bought a house nearby, and we've been there since. And it's to say it stunk a little bit is an understatement because I miss you, brother.
Yeah, I miss you too.
And it's just funny when you have friends and that connection. No matter if it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's awesome that it reconnects. And my wife always gets jealous of this because she moved a lot as a kid, and now with Facebook, I'll say, "Oh yeah, I knew those 4 people from kindergarten," and she's like, "What? Huh?" And yes, this person, if I called them tomorrow and needed money or somebody to bail me out of jail, they'd probably jump on a plane and come get me.
Right.
Which hopefully I won't need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
the old me.
Yeah. That's funny. Because I just let me interject since we're talking about that. So when we did Reconnecting and all that, we were hanging out and Billy Idol in Vegas. So
Yep.
this is before my mom and dad before I moved them out to Salt Lake City. So they're back in Detroit. And I think you know this story. So I called my mom. We're getting ready to fly out to Vegas, go see Billy Idol at the Palms. That's where he's performing. So we decided to get tickets. We kind of rock star lifestyle it up. I guess that weekend we decided we totally right.
Yeah.
So I knew it was going to be a good time, but I also knew who I was going with, which is you, because I had a history with you.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah. So I called my mom back in Detroit. And what is the area code in Vegas? 702?
Yes.
So I said, if you get a phone call and the area code is 702, please pick up, because that means, and this isn't due to me, but it's because I'm with him, we're in jail, and it's something that Doyle did or said.
Oh.
And I know. But that was, but it's,
Throwing me under the bus.
Yeah, well, taking your shirt off in the casino, taking your shirt off at the concert, and the security guy's like, tell your friend to put his shirt off or back on, or you guys are out.
That only happened twice.
3 times, 4 times,
okay,
maybe 5 times, because that was but it was a fun time, and luckily I didn't have to call my parents, but I did tell. I'm like, I'm not kidding, Mom. She's like, what are you talking about? What? I'm like, Ma, Doyle, and you know the old Doyle.
I will tell you that's the neurosis in you, looking at the negative side
not
and
the negative,
downside.
That's the looking. That's making sure all the ducks are in a row.
What's the absolute worst that could happen? Okay, let's plan for that.
Yeah, okay. We get thrown in jail and she doesn't pick up a 702 area code, right? And that's our one phone call.
Well, it's a night in jail.
Yeah, a night in jail in
nice,
Vegas.
A nice sleep.
I don't want to be in jail in Vegas.
Oh my goodness.
So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I had to put that story there.
No. For folks that don't know me, my guilty pleasure is Billy Idol. I've seen him 4 times, 3 times in Michigan, 1 time in Vegas now, and fantastic time. And he's better than ever. I can't wait to go see him again.
It was fun.
Too short. We should have stayed a week so we could sleep 3 or 4 days before we came home.
A week in Vegas is like a month in Vegas. Believe me, a night like we spent a day and some change. That's like 3 days in Vegas, 4 days.
That was absolutely that hurt. So I moved and we stay in touch, and that's kind of the history of us in a nutshell. It took us a while to get there, but that's the beauty of podcasts. We can talk as long as we want. Maybe even edit, but I doubt it. I'm just going to let it flow. I've been working in different industries and doing quite well, but they were up and down industries and getting frustrated. And like I said, I went to move and take care of my parents. And my dad was a World War II veteran and had VA benefits, but they were always getting denied or he couldn't figure it out. So I went down there to help, and for the last 5 years, and we've been a little bit in parallel. Your dad started getting in ill health, so we were on the phone a lot talking about it and just sounding it out loud because I knew what you were going through and you knew what I was going through. So we just it was good we had each other to text and to talk. And I ended up being my dad's advocate in his healthcare system because I'm thoroughly convinced that elderly. The healthcare system is set up against them. I've been in the hospital with him too many times where they have a shift change and the charts are read wrong, or the new doctor wants to do something completely different, or the VA denied something just because something was checked incorrectly, or so on and so forth. So I ended up being his primary caregiver for years, about 3 years. Brother and sister, big help, but I was the only local one, so we had a lot of things going on. And he finally passed last December, and right around that timeline, your dad passed as well. And sorry, brother, he was a good man. And
likewise.
And thank you. And at the time, I had been laid off again from in the industry. It seems to go in an 18-month cycle where they hire all the sales guys and I make a lot of money, and then they decide they can't afford that section, so they lay off all the sales guys, and I was getting so tired of that. And I sat down and made some life choices, and I actually did the old paper and pencil thing and wrote down pros and cons and what do you do, what do you like to do, and you and I had talked through it a few times, and you had mentioned, well, there's really no hindrance to, getting into the field. And I had a little time taking care of my dad, and I mentioned getting laid off. I had about 4 months where I could take care of my dad full time, and it was a blessing. I took care of him. I got to know him better than I ever did. And I was with him when he passed and got to be there every step of the way, much like you did with your dad when they moved out here. It was fantastic. But I had time to research. And I said, you know what, I'm going to try this. I know it's cliche. Everybody goes, oh, I'm going to start a podcast or I'm going to start a blog and see what happens. So I put together and I did some research. And, it's funny. We're at your place up north in your cabin. And you jumped in the shower, and I set up, and you walked out, and you go, "Whoa, hey, wait a minute!"
Impressed, huh?
Yeah,
looks good. It's a real setup, man.
It
is.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I like to think I sold technology, but I didn't use it. I used a computer, and I was good at things like that. But I researched pretty darn hard. I watched, I practiced, and I played around, and I felt, like we talked about earlier, I felt very self-conscious about getting in front of a camera, a little camera, and a microphone, and hearing my own voice, because it doesn't sound anything like what I hear in my ears.
You know the reason behind that?
No.
So with your ears, obviously, where they're positioned on your head, right?
Okay.
So what you sound like to you, it sounds funky because your voice projects out and your ears are here. So it sounds different because of the way that where the ears are placed on the head, right? So as far as acoustically, what you're hearing doesn't sound like, but what everybody else hears, when you are hearing it, is what you sound like. So it just takes a little bit of adjustment, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's
no,
because of where
absolutely.
yes.
So different waves are coming around to you. So
Yeah, so
probably
when you
lower, higher waves kind of rotate around.
And it sounds different in your head. But when you have the
Absolutely.
headphones on, you're like, holy crap, this is my voice. But that's what everybody else hears. But it does, technically sound different to you because of when you finally, when it's finally being processed in your brain because of where your ears are positioned. That's
Right.
why it takes a little bit to get used
Perfect.
to. Yeah.
And that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
You never think about it. And, as little kids playing with a tape recorder, you always heard your voice, and you're like, I sound like
Yeah.
that. What the heck is
But
that?
to help take some of the self-consciousness out of it, just think, like what you're hearing in your ears is what everybody, your whole life, that's what they hear, is that voice. So it's just a little uncomfortable for you, but that's what
Right.
everybody else hears is what you're finally hearing in your headphones, as you're speaking into the microphone.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I love learning stuff. and this is new to me. This is exciting. I have fire in my heart again about what I'm doing. And I figured I've been networking for 30 years. I've traveled everywhere. I've worked in different industries where I've met tons of people. I know different people. Let me just take a stab and see and play around. And it was literally 6 months to a year before I even had the guts to say, okay, let me see.
Right.
Just let me see. Let me play around with it, and we'll call it fun. And if it turns into something, fantastic. So having said that, I want to back up because it took me 40 years to think about speaking into a microphone.
Mm-hmm.
You came out as a teenager. We've had conversations where you said, I know what I want to do. I knew it was radio. I knew every fiber of my being that this is what I wanted to do. And then we've had conversations where, especially the old days of radio, it was a slave endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
Living as a pauper really isn't. A minor league baseball player looked down on you,
Mm-hmm.
and they make $20 a game or something.
Right.
So tell me, you went to the School of Broadcasting, and then did you get internships? Did you start at a radio station? Kind of go, not quickly, but kind of step me through your progression.
So I had this in me at the age of 14 or 15, so I knew I wanted to go into radio. I didn't know why, and I kind of figured it out, and I'll tell you in a second, and remind me so I don't forget, because I made the connection in my late 30s. It was obvious, but I never caught on to it until my late 30s of why, at a young age, I wanted to go into radio.
Aren't those realizations cool?
Yeah,
when you have a moment where
this is why I'm doing what. Well, I'll
cow.
just tell you now, so I don't forget. And since we're talking about our dads and our late, my late father and your late father, but how. So this is my father who grew up. My father was a little younger than your dad. So both of them grew up, old time radio though. So my dad was born in 1937, and he basically in the 40s, their TV, as he put it, when I was about 6 or 7, he's like, our TV, we didn't have it. TV wasn't around. He said it was old time radio. So we had to use our imagination. We had to have pictures in our head, when shows were on. So my dad at 6 or 7 sat me down, had all the old time radio programs, on tape or on record, and he sat me down. I'll never forget, he turned the lights down, right? He had the dimmer switch. He just put in, like, the dimmer switches, and so he turned the lights down low, and he said, all right, close your eyes. I want you to use your imagination. I remember him saying that, and I was like, okay. So he played, like, the very first, and I can't remember the very first radio show, but I can tell you a ton of shows that at that point, all the way until I moved out, and that is like, Lone Ranger, The Green Hornet, Dragnet, Fanny Bryce's Baby Snooks, The Life of Riley. I mean, all these, Burns and Allen. So all of those old-time radio programs, that was kind of our thing. He introduced those things that he grew up with to me at the age of 6 or 7, and I loved them.
So those were still playing on the radio, or
he had tapes and had records of them, and I have those records because he has since years ago gave them to me. He said, "Do you want them?" And I said, "Absolutely."
Please.
Are you kidding me? I mean, it's a big part of not only my childhood, but it's a big reason that I didn't make the connection until about the age of 38. All of a sudden, one day I thought, "Holy crap! This is the reason that I'm doing radio." Because of what that seed that my dad planted, and he didn't know, other than he was just sharing an experience that he had as a child with me. And I took to it and loved it. And that, again, was our thing. And not just at that young age, but all the way until I moved out, we would sit down and listen to, I just barely scratched the surface with all the, the War of the Worlds. And, I was listening to that at a young age and knew in my heart that I loved radio, but I didn't know why I wanted to get into radio. So I knew at 14 or 15, but I didn't know the reason. And it took me, because I'm not the brightest guy, it took me till the age of 38 to figure out why I'm doing what I'm doing, and it was because of my dad. And I actually had a chance to thank him. So years before he had passed away, because he passed away a couple of years ago this past February, but I also thanked him literally on his deathbed. And he had known at that point, but I had thanked him again and said, thank you again for, introducing that to me, because you are the reason that I work in something that I love to do. He truly is
That's just absolutely fantastic. I'm going to attempt not to cry here, but that is
cool, though,
absolutely cool.
Yeah, neat.
It gives me joy to hear that. That is so cool. And I will tell you something, now that you've said that out loud, my dad was a truck driver. And I know your dad worked in the same industry.
Yep.
So my dad was always going, and he had a truck with a cab in it. And as a small child, my brother and sister were much older than me. We won't say oops, but I was much later. And I ended up going on a lot of trips with him. And then he, 3/4 of the time, would have a motorhome where we would do a Florida trip. Of course, from Michigan, you go to Florida, you go to Disneyland, or you go to Vegas. There's no other place to go. Or you go back where everybody's from, Kentucky or Tennessee and Michigan, and we can talk about the Industrial Revolution sometime.
Right.
But not right now. So I have moved 6 times. I've had campers. I love to get in a car and drive.
You got that from your dad.
I absolutely did get that from my dad.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and that's funny because we've since, when I made that connection in my late 30s, and because of our radio show, it's a very life in a fishbowl kind of show, and we were very real and open.
You're very open.
This is what we do, and I love it. You're connecting on deep levels to listeners, and I love that. So that was one of the things when I figured that out, I threw it out, and we've done it a few times over the years, and it's always cool to throw it out and find out, what is it? If you've made the connection, and you might not, maybe you didn't make the connection, but since we're talking about it, you might actually make the connection right now as we speak. But what is it that got you into what you're doing now? Do you know what it was or who it was that planted that seed of what you were doing for a living? And it's neat to hear stories of people saying, I got into whatever they're doing because of this person or this person. And sometimes they make the connection while we're talking about it, and they'll text into the show, or maybe an email will come in a week later or something like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah. That's very cool.
Yeah. So that being said, 14, 15, I knew what I wanted to do. Couldn't wait to get through high school, because I'm like, man, it just felt like, and it's horrible to say it because I wish, I look back now on high school, and I just wish just for me, I wish I would have applied myself more. I was just kind of like, I couldn't wait to graduate. I'm like, I just want to be done with this place so I can go to this broadcasting school, so I can start, to get
what I want to do.
Yeah. But now that being said, we didn't have but an audio visual class. That was all we had in our high school in Lincoln Park High. And I graduated in 1989. Now they probably have, who knows? I don't know what they have, but we didn't have anything. I wasn't in the audio visual class. I didn't do that. I couldn't I couldn't get up in front of the class and give an oral book report, or anytime we had to do that, I would fixate on it. So if we knew that, okay, you've got this project or this report and it entails you getting up in front of people, and here is like when we're going to do it, whether it's next week or it's 2 months down the line, I fixated on that because I was such an introvert, and I still am which, believe it or not, I'm like the borderline introvert extrovert, but I'm on the border with that.
Let me jump in there for a second. It's funny. I was with the company for 11 years that liked to do all the Myers-Briggs tests. They did all the tests to find out what your strengths and your weaknesses, extrovert versus introvert.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started with the company, I was off the scale extrovert. And then towards the end of my career with that company, I had gotten married and had kids, and I started leveling off towards introvert. So at the beginning of my career, they would say, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Let's start working on your strengths and guide you that way. But we're also going to train you up in your weaknesses. And it didn't make sense to me at the time. And later in my career, they started working with your weaknesses and saying, well, if you step out of your circle of comfort,
mm-hmm.
you really focus and pay attention to what you're doing and work extra hard to do a good job. Now, they don't tell the frontline worker that, but they talk to management about that. And it was surprising to me in that my instructor in the class, who was gregarious and loud and fantastic, her name is Cindy, she shared her Myers-Briggs scores with us, and she was off the scales introvert.
Mm-hmm.
But yet she was in front of the class teaching. She goes, the second I'm out of this class, she goes, it makes me uncomfortable. I love it, but it makes me uncomfortable. And the second I'm out of this class, I'm a whisperer. I don't talk much. I'm a wallflower. I like to hear what other people are saying. I think very long on what people are saying before I speak. I just don't blurt things out.
Right.
So that neuroses of working on that area made her an excellent, probably one of the best instructors I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
And most memorable. So it's funny that you say introvert and working towards that.
Well, and that was, I think, a lot of people, even within the family, and to find out even years later, like years and years later, that I found out from certain family members, they were like, it just didn't seem like, I could socialize, but I was quiet. I was a quiet kid, and I had my friends and all that, but I wasn't, and I was funny around my group, my small group of friends. And as you know, like when I started at Dunham's Sporting Goods store, like where we first met in 1987, I could socialize, but to get up in front of somebody and speak, or here's a good example. I remember the first time that, a call came into the games department, and it turned out that it was actually a call for the hunting department, and I couldn't find the manager, Dave, and I think it was you or somebody that said, you got to get on, and here's how you do the intercom, and you go over the store and say, hunting, you have a call on line 4. That was a huge thing for me.
Big time. I remember that.
Freaked me out. So going back to high school, I couldn't get up in front of the class. It was hard for me to, speak, unless you were my friend or my small little group of, and I say small, I mean small group of friends. So that was a personal hurdle that I needed to get through, and I knew that. So I knew as I'm going into broadcasting school, and actually, when I finished, I got like a little award for, it was like most improved or something like that. It was like a small schmaltzy little award, but I really, and I still have that mug. It was a little Specs Howard mug that they gave me. And, it was a big thing to me because, when I first started, I was horrific. And when I ended, I was horrific, but there was some growth there.
Oh, sure.
From starting to finishing. And that was nothing more than me just getting my feet wet. So then it was just like able to get my foot in the door with this,
right.
Having connections and stuff.
And as we speak, I can visualize, and I remember, A, you were a good kid. B, you had all this energy, and I could see it behind your eyes and your body language that you were dying to get something out. But you would like get very nervous to get on the speaker. Mm-hmm. You would get nervous to talk about something you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I was great at it, but I would say, just go ask them what they need.
Right.
And if you don't know, say you don't know, let me go find somebody.
And it was hard for me to even walk up to that. That's a great example.
Yes.
Like in the sporting goods store, to walk up to somebody and ask them if they needed help. Is there any questions I can help you out with? So it was those little things that I knew with this career that I was going into, or I wanted to go into, that it was going to be a big personal challenge. Things that, there were walls that I needed to break through and break down, and I knew that, and that was something that, I look back and I don't know what it was, but it was a hard thing for me to do. It was a hard thing, but I knew I wanted to do this, and it was something that I needed to do.
And back to my statement, it's so weird that, they used to say, oh, here's your strengths, go do it. And then they start going, here's your weaknesses. You'd probably be better if you did this. So did you want to be, you wanted to be on radio? Did you want to be the guy that says, here comes, Prince, When Doves Cry, and spin the record? Or were you looking to be Howard Stern? What were you looking to do?
So when I first started, I knew I wanted to be, start off like doing a night show. So that was something that I was like, okay, I'm going to aspire to be a night guy, right?
Night calls.
Yeah, right. So that was something that I knew that I wanted to do. But when I first got my first jobs, though, just getting my feet in the door, one was like an internship out in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it was Tom Monahan, who used to own Domino's Pizza, and it was Domino's Farms. So he, at Domino's Farms out there outside of Ann Arbor, he had a couple of radio stations. So I got an internship at the FM, and it was just call-out research, and it was a paid internship, so I was thankful for that because it was gas money. It was like, I was paying for my gas to get out there. But then I had to open up like the white pages, and you go through and you randomly would call people and then ask them questions. So, think of that. Like, talk about, again, going back to, like, I got to call somebody out of the blue, cold calls.
No cell phones.
None.
White pages, you're actually picking up a big book, kids.
Yeah. So I had this problem, initially just talking to people outside of my small little circle. So think of that, how terrifying it is that I got to pick up a phone and call a random number there locally and then ask if I can ask them questions. Can I ask you some questions about, blah, blah, blah. So it's this call-out research, right? Exactly.
Click.
I was lucky if I got somebody to say no thanks, and then he's hanging up on me. So that was one job, and then that led into the AM sports station. The program director, he, and they were running like U of M football, Red Wings hockey, Detroit baseball, NASCAR. They were a sports station. They had some local sports shows. So at the time, Bo Schembechler, who was the legendary coach with U of M, he would come in and do a sports show. Now, I didn't see any of that. Like, I would see him off in the distance, but the program director of that AM sports station said, hey, maybe you can do some production, meaning like, dub off commercials. So it started where I was helping him out that way. And then all of a sudden, one of the guys Joe Falls, do you remember Joe Falls?
Absolutely, I remember Joe Falls.
I worked with this
ABC, I think he was on for a while.
Well, and Joe Falls, who used to write a column with the Detroit News or Free Press.
There you go.
Joe Falls. So his son, Mike, worked at this radio station, and he would, in between programming, so there might be a couple of hours of they call it middle of the road MOR music. So on stations like that, you have everything from Fleetwood Mac to at the time Mariah Carey when she was just hitting the scene, to maybe the Beach Boys, or like the Big Bopper. This middle of the road music, MOR music. So you would play that music in between programming. So it's primarily a sports station, but you might need to, in a smaller market, mind you. So in bigger markets, you don't get this, but you need to break it up or fill in that programming with music. So this guy, Mike, Joe's son, he was out that Saturday morning. I think it was 6 to noon. There was like a 6-hour gap between, overnights, like whatever was running overnights, and then there was something that was picking up on noon. He couldn't make the show. So I remember the program director, Dean, asking if I wanted to fill in. Now, this is after I got a couple. So I'll tell you the very first time that I got a chance to speak on the air. So I'm kind of fast forwarding. Let me rewind a little bit. So there was some programs that I was running. So he actually had me run some of the programs first. So I was running board opping, they call it. You're a board operator. So you're basically just making sure that everything is running, and then at the top of the hour, you're getting into like a national ABC News kind of feed coming in. But there's a 10-second. So back in the day, you had to do a 10-second local ID.
Yep.
So you had to give the call letters. You had to give the city where the station tower was licensed to. And so you had a 10-second, thing that you needed to fill. So between when that programming ended, and it gave you 5:59:50, right? And then right at the top of the hour, there's a national feed coming in, usually ABC News. So 10 seconds. I remember that very first time that I had to fill that. So I came on and I said, hi, this is Tony Corrigan on WPZA AM 1050, Ann Arbor, blah, blah, blah. And then that was only 5 or 6 seconds. I still have 3 or 4 more seconds to go. So, I had to say the current temp or whatever. And then I ended with the call letters on AM 1050 WPZA. And I think I was maybe a second shy of hitting that feed coming in. But that little very first glimpse of speaking on the air. So going back to all the stuff that I'm dealing with, right? Because of my personal stuff, I almost threw up. But leading up to that 10-second legal ID, I almost threw up. I was terrified. I'm like, oh no, but that was the very first start of me knowing I've got to break through this.
It's the thing you want to do.
I want to do this.
It's the thing you love to do. And you're almost throwing up. Almost like the quarterback going into the big game and he's throwing up first.
This is what I want to do, and this is my shot. So so that being said, so I'm running some of those shows, and now I'm getting a little bit more. I wouldn't say comfortable at this time, but I'm doing it more and more. And then that phone call came in from Dean, the program director, saying that guy Mike, who has a Saturday morning show from 6 a.m. to noon between programming, and all he's doing is playing music and just jocking it. They call, you're a jock, an on-air jock. Do you want to fill in for him? And of course I was terrified, and I didn't want to, but I did, but I didn't because I was so scared. I'm like, yeah, of course. So that was kind of the first real glimpse into, and I remember telling my mom and dad, because here is this little itty-bitty station. So at night they would power down back in the day, an AM station. They would do that for FCC rules, you couldn't impede on other people's signals and this and that. So you would power, but in the daytime it was like a 5,000 watt. So that meant it got into some of the suburbs of Detroit.
Whoa! So
that meant that my mom and dad could actually hear me. And I remember, so it was a big deal to me. So when I would fill in,
darn right, you're on radio.
They're listening to me, And I remember my dad, my mom and dad both, big champions of, and they were huge supporters of what I wanted to do, which But my dad, I remember him saying this. He's like, if I could listen to you all the time, he said I would. He said, and he said that. And
wow.
So that was a really big thing for me. I was like, right on, thank you. And I knew he was just. I was horrible.
Do you have tapes of this? Do you have tapes?
I don't have tapes of. Well, I probably do. So I'm not very good at keeping my stuff organized. But I have tubs and tubs, like plastic Home Depot tubs, of tapes.
Please find one.
Yeah, well, it might take me years to find it.
I don't care.
Yeah, I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tapes. Because I would tape when you could tape everything. I would tape all of my shows, all of them.
Reel to reel?
No, like cassette tapes.
Okay, cool.
So I've got tapes. So I probably do have them, but I wouldn't be able to find it in a million years.
Well, find some early ones.
I need to. So then that led into, so I'm doing part-time with that. At the same time, because I guess I'm kind of all over the road with this, but so at the same time, so I had quit Dunham's at that point. I think I was just getting ready to go to broadcasting school. And then I was working at the airport because I threw bags at the airport for a bit.
Right.
So I was working at the international terminal for this company called Butler Aviation. So it was a skeleton crew of guys that we would work these charter flights or whatever. And I loved doing that. But I was doing that while I was going to broadcasting school. And then I had another job with Butler Aviation where I transitioned over to working in a hangar with a buddy of mine, Keith, and we maintain GM's corporate jets. So it was GMATs. It was General Motors Air Transportation Services. So I was doing that. So I went from working the ramp, being a ramp rat, over to maintaining these. It was a little bit more. I think it was $1 more an hour while I was going to broadcasting school. While I was doing these internships and I remember that year, that was like 1990. I was doing like a million things just trying to make ends meet and just trying to get this career started. But then I got a chance. It was a small little market outside of Detroit, Adrian, Michigan. So it's like 70 miles outside of Detroit. and they needed, it was a news and information station. So this is like AM 1490 WABJ, Lenawee's news and information leader. Yeah, Lenawee County. I don't know if you're familiar with that county.
Yeah, Lenawee County.
So you got Adrian, Tecumseh, you got...
That's where the tornado warnings always were.
Exactly. So it's way out, way out in the sticks, but there was this overnight job. So they needed, it was from 11 to 6. So from 11 to midnight, I was basically coming in and just catching what was called TalkNet. So it was talk radio. It was a syndicated program. So I kind of kept that going until midnight. And then midnight hit the ABC News feed. And then after that is when it went live. So I got a chance because I was hired, it was an overnight. It was minimum wage. So I was making, I think at the time, it was like $4.25 an hour. But I was able to quit those other jobs, and then this is my full-time job. So I'm still living at home with my mom and dad.
Sure.
And I didn't want to move. I remember they wanted me to move to this little town in Adrian, and I was thinking no, because I still had kind of a plan. I'm like, I don't want to get stuck. I knew I needed to stay there for a bit to get some experience, and then I needed to move to gain more experience, and then I knew I needed to move around to get experience.
So, okay. So
I had the foresight.
You had done your homework and foresight, like you said.
Yeah.
You said to study it and say, okay, I don't want to be the 65-year-old guy still doing the news and radio in this small town. I got to get some experience and get better, and then
kind of grow, and get that experience. And the only way I was going to get it is by going to other markets, bigger markets, to gain that experience. So I remember before I took that job in Adrian, and then luckily I was offered the job. There was a job in Lima, Ohio. So you remember Lima, that's like way out in the middle of nowhere, right? So I interviewed there, and I remember I actually turned that job down because it was a really, really itty-bitty small town, and I would have had to have moved there. And I remember thinking, I don't want to get stuck here. I kind of had a plan of, when this Adrian job came about, I'm like, okay, this is close enough where I can, my parents were cool with me, as long as I've got a plan, they're fine with, you can live at home, and you're not going to be 25 living at home,
right?
But you can be 19 or 20 living at home because you've got something that you're kind of working towards. So I worked there for a bit. So I was doing the midnight to 6 that was live, and I got a chance to play. I really cut my chops. I was playing records. I was playing 2 turntables and a microphone. Sound like Beck, right?
A little Beck.
But yeah, I had a chance to really start, building and just cutting my teeth with what I wanted to do, right?
So is that the old days of turning the record until it gets to the right groove?
It's called queuing it up.
Queuing it up.
Queuing up the record.
Having that one ready, and
there's a difference between like a 45 and a 33, knowing like where it is, like where you would come back maybe a quarter turn here, maybe 3/4 of a turn there for depending on. So I still remember all that stuff, but yeah,
cool.
But I had to learn, and it was like baptism by fire. And I remember when I first got the job there, I had nightmares of my songs running out. You know what I mean? It was like that kind of in my psyche, like, a song running out, not having the other one queued up and ready to go. And it was that kind of stuff messing with my head for the first bit.
So in retrospect, now that you are where you are, you can look back and say, okay, the manager knew I was going to screw up. He knew he was paying me nothing.
Yeah.
He knew I was young.
Nobody's listening.
But you are scared to death of making one mistake.
Yes.
One mistake.
One mistake. And I made some mistakes, but there were, seriously, I don't know how many people listened, but I can tell you it was probably a handful. I mean, I would get calls into, the studio, and it was the same people, and it probably was, probably 5 people. And I'm not exaggerating. It was probably 5, maybe 10 people that were listening overnight while I was on the air. Right, and I would get some weird phone calls, and then I would get some regulars, people that were working at maybe a factory or a factory that was somewhere within Lenawee County that they were working the overnight shift with me. But yeah, I was doing everything, man. I was playing the music. I was calling all the police department. I was calling the state police to find out, because I was doing local news coming off of ABC, the national news. I would do local news, sports and weather, so it was like maybe a 2.5-minute thing, and then I would get into music from the rest of that, and I did that from 12 to 6. So I got a chance to really kind of learn it.
Do you think, to segue a little bit, or not really segue, I have stayed at your house, and I have watched you prep.
Yeah.
And I have watched your folders of information. In today's world, I'm sure if you learned in today's world, it would be different. But I've seen your folders of preparation, and you are meticulous, thorough, and don't interrupt me, I'm prepping.
Right.
You're not mean about it, but I actually see you hyper-focus on what you're doing. Do you think those days kind of drove... I'm absolutely sitting here right now. I'm sure they drove you and kind of molded how you prep for your show today. Because I watch you, people, because you make it look so easy,
Yeah.
I'm sure people think you just show up and start talking.
Yeah.
And so, guest A will be on at 10 after and so. That's not the case. I've had the chance to watch A, to prep, and B, the actual show, and it is a fine-tuned oil machine watching you work. And you have a system, and I almost guarantee now that you've said that, okay, I had to call state police and get the news. I had to call the weather and get the weather. I had to call this, and I had to have a 3-minute, 42-second to fit this.
Yeah.
And I had to do this, and then I had to be 8 seconds before the national news came on, and then I had to fill this minute. That had to, wouldn't you think?
Well, I think the work ethic was there. I think that that's due to my mom and dad. So we had a good work ethic, and as you know, like coming into Dunham's, like you, I mean, we have very similar work. I mean, we have the same work ethic. Where we're from, I mean, it's kind of like ingrained in us. So I think coming into radio, I was willing to learn and work hard and kind of go above and beyond, right? And so
absolutely.
I don't think the stuff that, as far as the way that I do things now, that didn't come until, as far as I didn't know what it was. But I was like working hard, but I really didn't have a system because I wasn't doing mornings for a bit yet. So when I moved down, when I moved from Michigan, from Adrian, Michigan, or Detroit, Michigan, down to Fort Myers, I knew at that point I kind of hit a ceiling at this radio station out in Lenawee County. I was like, nothing against I mean, they were great people, and Bruce Goldson, my general manager, is still the owner of that station, and he owns several other radio stations. He understood. Like I came to him, and I'm like, I have to go, and
scared to death to talk to him, but at the same point when you went in there, he's like, okay.
He knew, but at this time, so when I left that job in Michigan, I didn't have another job lined up. So I was cold calling down radio stations down in Fort Myers. I was sending tapes and resumes. I'd sent, at that point, probably 100 tapes and resumes out, seriously. I mean, since I started in the business to get the job in Adrian, I probably had sent 50 out, right? And then at that point, another 100. I'm not exaggerating. There's probably another 50 or 100 that went out, and I'm sending them everywhere. That's the thing. I had no idea. I knew I wouldn't get jobs in these major markets, but I was still sending them to the major markets, thinking, well, you never know. And
you never know.
But
and you were relentless. And how many others do you think that radio station received just like you?
Yeah,
I mean, it's 200.
Yeah, I don't know. I know they had when I did get an interview, and I could see, or when I was working in radio stations, when it was still a tapes and resumes thing, they would have a bin basically. And, it was the tapes and resumes were in this bin off to the side of the program director's desk or the GM or whatever, whoever was doing the hiring.
Wow.
So it was like a plastic bin of tapes and resumes. So you'd have the tapes in there, and then you'd have the resumes on the desk. Or maybe you might have them off to the side. Maybe Anyway, so when I left that station, I had no gig lined up down in Fort Myers. Now, here was my connection down to Fort Myers. I knew I needed to move from Detroit. It was a big market. And I had sent some stuff down to Toledo. Now, I have to give a shout-out to her name was the program director. Do you remember FM 104 WIOT?
Yeah.
So they bled in. So this is a Toledo rock station that bled into the suburbs of Detroit. So there were other stations that we grew up with in Detroit. One in particular where I actually interned at Wheels while I was throwing bags.
WLLZ.
Yeah, with WLLZ, and I interned for Chuck Santoni doing middays and just taking phone calls and working promotions. So I did that while I was working at the airport, while I was going to broadcast school, before the WABJ Adrian, Michigan gig. So I sent this tape and resume to FM 104 in Toledo, and I remember she was one of the first ones that picked up, because I would always follow up with a phone call. So again, this is pre-email and all that, pre-internet. So, nobody would take your phone calls, right?
You're doing everything right, though. I mean, you're sending it, you're following up.
And I'm trying.
Yeah.
She was the one at the time. So here I am trying to, and I think this is before I decided to go down to Fort Myers, but I knew, I needed to kind of get out of Detroit because it's a big market, and I'm not going to get a gig in Detroit without experience. I got to gain this experience. And I kind of hit the limit there in Adrian. So she picks up my phone call. And now this is a small, I got to say, this is like a medium market, small to medium market, Toledo, right? But they sounded huge. And
Toledo.
they were a slick station. And they, like I said, they bled into the suburbs of Detroit. And they were a dominant, station down in Toledo. And they had a little presence in Detroit. I don't know if it actually cut into the Detroit market. Probably not.
It's a little smaller than Detroit, but it's still good size.
Yeah, and in my mind, it's like huge because they sounded major, right? They were just huge. But she picked up the phone. And because I sent her a tape and resume, and she said, listen, here's the thing. And I don't know to this day if she was blowing smoke up my butt or whatever, but she said, you are cream of the crop. I'll tell you that. She said, we don't have anything here for you. She said, but you need to keep sending your stuff out there. You're really good. And I remember her saying that. And whether or not she meant it, which I would like to think that she did, right?
Well, look at you today. There was something there. But
I listened to these tapes, and I remember I still have the tape that I sent. That I have a certain, there's certain tapes in a certain time when I was sending out these tapes and resumes. My demo tape, it was horrible. It's horrible. I mean, I hear people, younger people coming into the industry now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so talented right out of the chute. That wasn't me.
Right.
I wasn't, and I don't even think of myself now as like I think I'm a lot more comfortable with what I do, but I was not talented at all. I might have had, like you could hear maybe the drive in me or the passion, but as far as any of the other stuff, it was bad. It was really bad. My voice was like, it was kind of like talking like this. I was kind of hanging on WABJ. It was like a horrible delivery. I wasn't comfortable.
Right.
I never truly found my voice. You know what I mean? I didn't until later on, until you actually hear that and feel that voice. You know what I mean? When you find it. And I mean in a like figuratively sense. Like you know what I'm saying? Like when you just find that voice.
Comfortable and it's
exactly.
Yes, I know.
So that came years down the line. So anyway, so what she had said really just kept me like, okay, I know I'm supposed to be doing this, right? Even though I knew like, oh man, I just sound bad. And, and going back to my mom and dad, and my dad in particular, when he'd listen, because I'd let him listen, I'd air check, at that little station in Adrian, and he'd listen to it. And he's like, you sound really good. If you were on the air here, I would listen to you. And I remember he would always say that.
That's huge.
And it kind of kept me
absolutely huge.
Yeah, it kept me going, And so at the time, I had a buddy, Keith, that moved down to Fort Myers, Florida. And he had said to me, look, you need to come down here, get a job in this market. I know you can get a job down here. And I was like, oh, he's like, you can stay with us until you get a place, until you get a job, and then you can get a place. But
people don't know Keith, but was he married at the time?
He was not married, but they had a little boy, Anthony, at the time. So they didn't get married until later on. They're together. Yeah, they're whether they like it or not, they're together at the moment, right? So yeah, he said, come on down, and I did. I took him up on that. But in the meantime, before I made the move, I was sending out tapes and resumes and pounding the pavement from Detroit down to Fort Myers. And I remember there was a guy at an oldie station. His name is Marty Berger. So he had a Detroit connection. He was from Sterling Heights, which is outside of Detroit.
Yep.
And he took my phone call when I followed up, when I sent him a tape and resume. Now, he was the PD of an oldie station. So here I am, 20 years old or whatever, 21 years old, and I sound young. I do not fit an oldie station. And he told me that. He said, here's the thing. You don't have the sound for our station. He said, but here's what I'm going to tell you. He said, nobody's going to hire you part-time. You're not, you don't have the experience to get a full-time gig, but nobody's going to hire you from there in Detroit down here in Fort Myers part-time. He said, you need to move down here. And at that point, I already had the invitation, the extension, like the extended invitation.
Great advice.
Yeah. He said, you need to come down here. Then you'll get a job. So I went down there. Moved down there, all my stuff in my Ford Festiva. Woo. I had a 1990 Ford Festiva that I sold my Mustang because remember, like when I got that gig out in Adrian, it was 70 miles each way. I was putting whatever it was, like 1,100 miles or 1,000 miles. It was a crazy whatever it was. Like, I mean, do the math, but that was back and forth like a week because I was working 6 days a week at this radio station in Adrian. It was just ridiculous, the miles. So I had to sell my Mustang. So I had that 85 Mustang, that little four-banger, but I love that Mustang. You remember the Mustang?
Yeah, I do.
So I had to get rid of that, and that was one of the, I guess my point is with that, it was one of the sacrifices that I knew I needed to make in order to kind of get this career started, and that was selling this gas guzzler to get something that wasn't, believe me, I wasn't picking up any chicks in a 1990 Ford Mustang, right? But like powder blue or whatever the heck the color was, like surf blue, I think is the name of the color. But this thing got 42 miles to the gallon, and it served its purpose. So I packed this little Festiva up and made the move down to Fort Myers, Florida. All my stuff in this thing. Within 2 weeks, I got a job at the big flame throwing top 40 radio station down there.
What were you doing there?
So they hired me as swing. So basically, the swing shift was whenever we need you, and I started off doing overnights. So I had a little bit of the jockin history from Adrian, so I knew how to. So now I didn't have record players there. I had CDs, so I had to learn all this new equipment. But then I was also cutting up phone calls on the reel-to-reel. But like when it eventually led into doing the night show. But that was overnights. Then I would work like a 12 to or whatever the shift was, 2 to 6. And then the morning person would do the morning show, and then the midday person needed somebody to fill in for him. So I would be sleeping in the conference room, waiting for So I just wrapped up at 6 a.m., go sleep for 3 hours.
Which, by the way, were you making much more than minimum wage?
I was making. So at the time, I had 3 other roommates. So when I got that job, I met a guy. The same day we were hired at the same day. So we. Eventually became roommates, and then we had another guy, Chris from Detroit.
Yep.
So we know Chris, and he's down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida now. He doesn't work in radio, but he came down from Detroit, so he and I shared a bedroom. And then the other 2 radio guys that I worked with at the radio station, they shared a bedroom. So it was 4 single guys in a 2-bedroom apartment. It was a nice apartment, but there was no way I could afford to live there if I didn't have 3 other roommates.
And my point being, especially in those days, radio was... They didn't pay well.
No.
And it's starting out especially, but until you are where you are at now, radio is a fledgling endeavor. Now it's changing a little bit.
And even now, I mean, it's, you don't make a lot getting into it, breaking into it. Maybe not like the days of when I started into it, but it's just like anything else. Like you don't make, and there might be some other industries where you come in making a nice salary, but radio is kind of, and always has been, where it's might be a lower end, but you come in, and if you stick with it, and then the money will come.
Well, I think from the outside looking in, they knew you were passionate, and they knew people were passionate that were getting into that business, so they knew they kind of had you, for lack of a better term. So you would take minimum wage or whatever, as long as you were getting that experience and thought it was something
that I'm working
moving
towards.
You forward.
Yeah. And so okay, so I had the 3 roommates. I'm working swing shift, but I couldn't afford even with that. So I had a friend who I'd met along the way. He worked in the mortgage industry, so he at one point had me where he knew some people at this mortgage company or this title company. So I was searching land titles to make up for what I wasn't. So I was doing that part-time, and I was also a secret shopper. So our program director, his wife, was the manager of Kelly Temporary Services. So she would let me know when there were jobs. And I would go on different types of jobs, but I became a secret shopper for Home Depot. That was for whatever reason, they liked what I was doing. So that was a part-time job that I would do that and search land titles and then work, whenever they needed me. And that led into the late night shift. So I was, then I got the 10 to 2 shift. And then eventually I got the 6 to 10 shift. So that was the night show. And then I hit a ceiling there. I kind of knew I needed to grow. I was getting direction there from the program director, but at the time, like not the direction that I thought I needed. Like I need to grow. I need to continue to grow. And then financially, I was making, so with all the jobs that I was working, including doing that nighttime show. So I think actually when I got the nighttime job, I was able to do away with the other. So, but I was like making $10,500 a year, $10,500 a year.
And that was, for folks that don't know Tony, Frankie, 97.1 ZHT, he's a big deal out here now, guys. And I know you're going to be modest about it, but in Utah, you are huge, and iHeartRadio and everything else. You are, my friend, you are a big deal. And we are getting there, but that is the reason, other than you being my friend, that we're sitting here today, because I am always fascinated, and especially fascinated, because there had to be many points where you were sitting there saying, I don't know if this is ever going to work out. I'm making 10.5 a year, 10,500 folks. Living with 3 other guys that I don't necessarily want to live with. I'm driving my Ford Festiva that I'm really glad it made it to Florida. Where is my big break? I'm a dreamer. And this is what always fascinates me with entrepreneurs, dreamers, business moguls. They always have that gear or that thought in their head that it's right around the corner. I'm going to make it. And it's not fatalistic either. They are driving towards a goal and they're going to get there. Rather than, oh, I'm not going to make it. So my uncle got me a job at Ford, so I'm going to go back to Ford. Nothing wrong with Ford.
Right.
But it wasn't your dream.
Right.
And you hung on and stayed with it. And there's a great ending to this, folks. But what you had to go through, because we're talking years and years.
That's 1992.
Yeah.
So 1992.
Indentured servitude.
Right. And so 10.5, and I went to my program director and I said, I need, because I started kind of in my mind, like, okay, I need to do something about this situation. I'm like, I need 13.5 to kind of, I think I just had, I don't know if I had quit. I think I did. I was able to quit the title thing. So searching for land titles. And then I still was like, so I said 13, and he's like, I can't give you a raise from 10.5 to 13.5. And at that point, I knew I needed to make that decision. It's time to move on. So again, I'm making this decision. This is kind of horrible. So, because I remember my dad always saying, never quit a job unless you've got another one lined up.
Many times.
Yeah. And I've been guilty of pulling this, like I should have taken that advice. It's worked out, but I should have taken that advice because I was kind of notorious for this, starting out. So I ended up quitting, and at that point, I was putting out the tapes and the resumes. So what I ended up doing is I moved back to Detroit for about a month. Now let me kind of rewind. So when I first moved down to Florida, and I was struggling the whole from the time that I was in Fort Myers, but at the same time, I'm struggling, but I'm loving every minute of it. So I didn't go to college. I went to broadcast school.
Right.
But I look back at these days, and it's like these were my college days. I was so kind of
trade school.
Yeah, and I was hyper focused on what I wanted to do, and so I was struggling financially and even emotionally. Like when I first made that move, I would call on a payphone, collect to my mom and dad back in Detroit, over behind this McDonald's, near the apartment that I was living in, and I would call just to check in. And I remember one time it was either my mom or my dad saying, and I love them for this because they could sense that I was suffering and struggling.
Right.
But they never said, why don't you throw in the towel and come back home? They did say one time, just now, I think my dad said it, or my mom might have said this, but they're both on the same page. Just know that if you need to come home, you can. And that was the extent. They said it one time. And I said, I know. Thank you. I appreciate that. But they could sense that struggle, and I tried to cover it up as best I could. And now my mom says years later, she's like, if I didn't know you were struggling that bad. I'm like, well, Ma, I was fine. Everything was, but she knew that they both knew there was struggle, and you need to struggle. I really think it's important for people to struggle. So so going back to when I asked the program director for that raise, and he couldn't do it, so I thought I've got to make this happen. So now it's 93. It's right around 93. And I moved back to Detroit. So I've got feelers out, okay? I've got tapes and resumes out. And I actually had a friend up there that I didn't know, but it was a friend of a friend. He was the program director of WYCD, which is Young Country in Detroit, which you think country Detroit, that doesn't make sense. Actually, country in Detroit, since that station, actually before that station, W4 Country, you remember that was the,
It makes big sense because what folks don't understand, and we alluded to that earlier with the Industrial Revolution, and I'll go ahead and fill that part in, is Detroit was a metropolis. After the late 1800s and early 1900s, when wars started happening and steel and making tanks and cars and Henry Ford, all the jobs were in Detroit.
Yep.
So where did people come from? Well, New York had their own folks, but people came from Kentucky. They came from Tennessee. Some from Ohio, but Ohio had Toledo and everything, had their industrial towns. But Detroit and Flint were everybody. came from the South for jobs. Truck drivers. My parents are from Tennessee. Your parents are from...
Well, they're from Detroit, but I have on my mom's side, so my aunt, her sister, he came up, my Uncle Larry, from South Carolina, and they came up for the auto industry. It's
right.
Like, you know,
that's all the jobs were there. You work for some form or fashion of that industry. I can't say it enough. To the point where Taylor was called Taylor-Tucky.
We lived in Taylor for a bit before Lincoln Park.
Because a majority of the people had moved from Kentucky.
Right.
So it was Taylor-Tucky. And so on and so forth. So, okay, you're back in Michigan and you're at a country station.
So not at a country. So I had made this connection from another person that I knew. Or actually, I don't remember how I made the connection. I think actually I just reached out to him. So his name is Eddie Haskell. That's his air name. And he's still in the business, and he's a great guy. And I think it might have been just a cold call, and he was nice enough, and to this day I'm still friends with him, and he's a great guy. But he took my phone call. I'd sent him a tape and resume. He actually took an interview with me and said, look, I don't have anything full-time, but I could use you part-time. So I was like, holy crap, part-time in Detroit, that's amazing, right?
Right.
I mean, you could do really well, but then there was that little voice in the back of my head saying, you still don't have the experience, man, and you could be doing part-time in Detroit for the rest of your career. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. But I had something that I was kind of striving towards. Yeah. And I thought I still needed more experience. So at that time...
Wow, my friend, you are singularly focused, and I more admiration every day.
Thanks.
Go on. I'm sorry.
So at that time, so I'm getting ready to okay, you know, and then I get a phone call from my buddy down in Fort Myers, who I worked with at that Top 40 station, Jim, and this guy's a great guy and another friend to this day, just a great dude. So he calls me up. Now we're radio. I've been a radio geek, obviously, so I know all the, you know, we both were just geeked out by the just different stations and this and that. So he calls up and said, hey, the Big Ape in Jacksonville, and this is a station. It's WAPE. It's a legendary station in Jacksonville, Florida. So the late actor Jay Thomas, who was Eddie from Cheers, he started there. The Grease Man, the original Shock Jock, the Grease Man, he started there at the Big Ape. Yeah. So they needed an overnight guy / producer for the morning show, and my buddy Jim calls me up and said, This job is open and you need to apply for it. I'm like, dude, I'm not going to get a job at the Big Ape. I mean, come on. That's a legendary station. I know it's overnights, but there's no way. I don't have the experience for that. He's like, just send a tape and resume. And I'm like, I'm going to send it, but okay. And that was kind of the extent of it. Well, I think I followed up with a phone call. Yeah, I followed up with a phone call. The program director took my phone call and was nice enough to take it and said some really nice things on there, and I'll never forget this. So he said, the production director, Matt Ray, actually popped his head in while I was listening to your demo and said, who is that? And so he said, yeah, so we love the way you sound. You're really good, but this is what he said to me. But buddy, this isn't Fort Myers, Florida. This is Jacksonville. They don't like Yankees down here. And that's what he said to me. And I remember, and he's a Southern guy. He's like, buddy, they don't like Yankees. And I was like, I said, well, just let me meet you. Let me meet you. And he said, well, and he kind of basically at that point stopping me from saying anything more. And I said, here's the thing. And I just kind of interrupted him. I said, I'm going down to visit my buddy in Fort Myers, where he knew I just worked there. And I'm going down there. I've already got this trip planned. Let me come and meet you. And he said, you've already got this trip planned. And I said, yeah, it's already booked, and I'm going down to meet him. So let us make the drive from Fort Myers to Jacksonville, and I would love to meet you. Just let me meet you. And it's a 5-hour drive. And he was like, okay, if you've already got the trip planned, then okay, then I will meet with you this Monday. So this Monday morning, I'll put you up at the Comfort Inn in Jacksonville Beach, because we have trade there, right?
Right.
So he said, I'll put you guys both up there. He said, if you are coming down for him, then I will do that and meet with you on Monday morning. I'm like, absolutely. So I hung up the phone with him. I'm like, yes. I'm like, I got to book a flight to get down to Fort Myers, Florida. So I picked up the phone and I called like Frontier Airlines and got like a $150 charter flight down, from Detroit to Fort Myers. I didn't have a flight booked. I didn't have a trip booked.
Oh, that's amazing. No.
I didn't have anything. I didn't have nothing. I lied. I totally lied. And then I called Jim. I'm like, dude, I'm coming down. And so he was living with his parents at the time. He was like, absolutely, you can stay with me. So, we drove on that Sunday night to Jacksonville, Florida from Fort Myers. We stayed at the Comfort Inn.
Did you buy a one-way ticket?
No, I didn't. I bought a round trip because I wasn't that confident.
Okay.
Or that stupid. Get stuck down there in Fort Myers again. I'm like, hey, I'm back.
Hey.
It's because I bought a one-way ticket and I didn't get the job in
no
Jacksonville.
money.
Yeah, and I'm stuck. So I interviewed with the program director at this radio station in Jacksonville, and we hit it off, and it felt good. And then I didn't know if I was going to get the job, so I went back. My buddy Jim and I drove back to Fort Myers. And I was sleeping on his bedroom floor, and I was staying down there because I booked it was a week trip. So basically I had the rest of the week down there. So, and this is pre-internet. This is 1993. So I'm waiting. One day goes by, no phone call. He knows where I'm staying.
Right.
Next day, no phone call. And it was probably on that Thursday morning, maybe that Friday morning, and I might have been flying back that Friday. I think it was that Thursday morning. All of a sudden his mom comes in, and she's like, Frank. She's like, phone, it's for you. And I'm like, and she's, yeah. So and all of a sudden, right? So it's the program director, this guy, Jeff McCartney, the original Jeff McCartney, because my PD now at 97.1 ZHT is Jeff McCartney, but he took his name from the other Jeff McCartney, who's a friend of his as well. It's kind of a
funny.
weird, it's a small industry. Everybody knows everybody. So he's like, and this is what he said. He's like, hey, buddy, you there? You sitting down? And I was laying on the floor because I was like sleeping on the floor. He's like, congratulations, buddy. You got the job.
Wow.
So it was like, holy crap. Now that job paid $14,000 a year. So I'm like, this is awesome.
Wow. Big time, big money, buddy.
Now it's not enough to, and this is what was cool about that guy. So I'm working overnights. It was about, I think 3 a.m. to 5:30 a.m. I'm on the air. 5:30 to 9 or 10, I'm producing for the morning show. So I'm basically just jockeying real quick, but I'm preparing for the morning show. That was kind of what I was doing and what I was hired for. But that morning show, so that's when I officially technically started doing mornings, but that was nothing more than me just sponging off of somebody who was extremely talented. So that guy, the host of the show, was the sidekick to Greaseman. Okay. So he learned from Greaseman. So he was a legend there in Jacksonville. So that kind of the prepping technique, so all this stuff that I was doing before, I really didn't see how it was supposed to be used until I worked with that guy.
Okay.
So I learned a lot from Hoyle. His name was Hoyle Dempsey, and then I worked there for about 3.5 years. They changed about 1.5 years into the show. They changed the direction of the show. They brought me in the foreground. So I was now. I did away with I did away with that overnight shift, and I was able to just do the morning show and produce and be a sidekick on the morning show and just sponge. And I learned, and it was awesome. And that was due to, who Scott Shannon is, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So Scott Shannon was friends with Jeff McCartney because those two worked with each other back in the day at this huge station in Atlanta, this flame-throwing top 40. So he came down, he was golfing with Jeff, and he was kind of like, need to hear more of the kid. That was kind of the young guy. There was like, and Jeff's like, what? And he was like, you got to have more of the kid on the show. More of the kid. Bring more of the kid onto the show.
Wow. So you were that gem. I mean, you're starting to shine through, and people are saying, let's hear some more.
So yeah, so that was, so I was getting ready to, because of some internal stuff on that show that wasn't with anybody that I named, but there was somebody else on the show that was kind of it was just a toxic environment. So I was working on that show with this person for however long I was there, like 3.5 years. Actually, this was like at the time when that happened, it was about 1.5 years into it. So right before they brought me to the forefront of the show, or more of a on-air role, I actually was at my wit's end. And because it was a crazy situation and a toxic situation, I ended up interviewing at a station in Hartford to work as a producer for this morning guy up there because I couldn't take the situation that I was working with this other person on the show.
Connecticut, right?
So that was in Connecticut, yeah. Right. So I actually had a letter of intent that I was getting ready to sign with this station, but I went to that program director, Jeff McCartney. I was like, I'm putting in my 2 weeks. And he was like, you can't put in your 2 weeks. And this is before this knew they were going to blow up the show and kind of make me more of a part of the show. He's like, you can't do that. And here's why. And he told me about that Scott Shannon thing. And he said, and here's what we're getting ready to do. And we're getting rid of this person. And he had it in writing. If he didn't have it in writing, I would have thought it's BS.
Right.
I'm like, I don't know if I believe you. He pulled it out of his drawer and said, here's what we're looking at doing. And he said, and Scott Shannon actually said, you need to be a big part of this. And this is, and so at that point, I was that close to accepting a job because of the environment that I couldn't take it anymore. And I had to, which was good because I actually flew up for the interview in Hartford, and then I called him and said, look, I'm going to stay here because they're, they're doing away with the situation. With the reason that I was leaving, they're actually going to fix it. And it's going to be a better thing for me where I'm going to have a little bit more.
I'm guessing, just the way I'm hearing about radio, they weren't upset. They probably said, yeah, that's probably a good move.
Yeah. So you mean the people in Hartford?
Yeah.
They might have been a little upset, but they understood and they got
right.
it, and they knew that it was a good thing. But so going back to when I got first hired for $14,000, now I wasn't able to live by myself. I would have still had roommates if it wasn't for that program director, Jeff McCartney. So he knew that I, still wasn't making anything. But the way to make up for that is to give me remote broadcast. So I was doing probably 3-4 remote broadcasts a week. So I was able to offset, that 14 with about another 14 or 15. So I was making, probably $29,000 a year.
So people not in the industry, the way it works is you have your salary for doing your regular radio gig, and then if you go to a car dealer, say, and do a remote broadcast, that car dealer pays the station extra, and they give you a cut of that.
A talent fee.
Yeah, talent fee.
So I was able to, and he knew this, and he knew that I would be struggling, so he personally made sure that I was getting out. So it benefited the station, it benefited me financially and professionally, because it gave me a chance to not only come into a market where nobody knew me, but it gave me a chance to build recognition quickly.
You're grassrooting it.
Yeah. And so I was able to now I didn't have a life, which I didn't care about. So I was literally just working day in and day out.
Yep.
I was exhausted at the end of the week, but again, I was building towards something. I was honing this craft, and I was learning from some of the best. I mean, some of the most talented people in the business.
Credit in the bank.
I really was.
For yourself and for the industry.
Yeah, and I loved every minute of it. I'm trying to think. Kind of lost my train of thought. So I'm there for about 3.5 years, and then that was so I had an offer to that was the thing. So I'll kind of give you the long and skinny of it, because I think this thing is probably running a little long.
Yeah, well.
Are we good on time?
Yeah, we're going.
Okay, all right. So then there was an offer for a station up in D.C., and I remember when I saw the opening for this morning, because I wanted to, I was doing a lot of things there, but I still wanted to grow. And I remember going back to that production director, the one that popped his head into the program director's studio or office. Sure. Remember when he was like, that guy's really good. Like, who is that? That whole thing. So he was a big supporter of mine. This guy, Matt Ray, worked at the Big Ape. So the first time that I filled in for Hoyle, that's when I knew that I wanted to do mornings. Like, I knew that I'd known that I wanted to strive for mornings, but that's when I knew that I should be doing mornings.
So it clicked. It felt right.
It felt right.
Awesome.
So everything felt right, and I remember him popping his head in, like he was listening on the way in. So that was the first time that I filled in for Hoyle, and that was another program director that actually came in. His name was Cat Thomas. He let me fill in for Hoyle, and he was, that I owe that to him for letting me fill in, as opposed to having somebody else fill in for Hoyle. So that was kind of another break, right? Right. So when I'm doing that first show and hosting the show, that guy Matt popped his head in to the studio and was like, buddy, he's like, you were meant for this. And I'm like, right? And I looked at him like, right? I totally feel it too, man. It just feels like it was meant, like this is what I need to be doing, right?
Wow.
Mornings.
Awesome.
And I'm already working on a great show. And like I said, just kind of learning from the best. I'm sponging. So then I saw this opening up in Washington, D.C., and it was a co-host position at a big station up there, this big personality. And I sent off a tape and resume. And, long story short with that, ended up getting hired. And it was a 5-year deal with ABC Disney at this big station in D.C. Yeah. But here's the thing with that is about I don't know, 8 months into it, 7 months into it, they came to me, and I knew a week into it, it wasn't working. I could just tell it wasn't gelling.
Okay.
And nothing against anybody. It just wasn't gelling. So the guy that I was working with, he had lost his partner of 9 years who went off to work with another guy in the industry and kind of was growing. You know, he had things, aspirations that now he hosts a big show in Atlanta, this guy Bert.
There was some Don and Mike up in that area?
Don and Mike were in D.C., yeah.
Okay.
And so those guys.
They got syndicated. And I used to listen to them on some crazy station in Reno.
Yeah, okay.
And
they were out of WJFK in D.C.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And
Don and Mike.
Yeah, I miss those guys. They were funny.
And I think they actually had a rivalry with the guy that I worked with, so they would come at him and stuff. But this guy is, the guy that I worked with was a legend in the business, and he knew. It's like, whatever, you come at me, but, he's a legend in his own right. So I'm working with this guy. And again, I could tell right out of the shoot, week into the gig, like, okay, it's not jiving. It's just not happening. But it was a 5-year deal that I signed with ABC Disney. They're not going to let me out. But they came to me and they said, look, it's not working. I'm like, oh, it's not. We need to do something about it. So ultimately, we ended up parting ways, and that was a good thing. So then fast forward to taking a job in Charlotte, North Carolina, co-host position.
Holy cow.
Thought that I knew who I was working with because I worked with him. He did the night show at the Big Ape in Jacksonville, so I kind of had a small little rapport with him.
Right.
Turned out where he ended up stabbing me in the back. He was friends with the program director who also stabbed me in the back. So I was 3 months into that gig. This is early 1997. And I had no contract, live and learn, right? Nothing. It was all verbal, and which doesn't mean anything when it's verbal, right? I don't have a leg to stand on, because what had happened is I started off as the co-host, and then they wanted to pull me off the air and make me into an off-air producer because of the host of the show. He was getting jealous because it's just, without getting into it, but
Sure.
Yeah. So
I got you.
Stepping on his toes, and he apparently didn't like it, went to the program director. They pulled me off wanted to pull me off the air. And I basically I ended up taking my toys and going home. I'm like, I'm quitting. So I called the old program director of mine, Jeff, who was like a mentor. And I said, I'm getting ready to burn a bridge. Is it going to hurt me in my career? And he said, buddy, I think you're fine. Nobody really likes this guy. So I ended up going in on Memorial Day weekend, 1997, into the studios. I had a letter of resignation for the program director, one for the GM, and one for all the salespeople to let them know, like, before my name gets smeared, here's what really happened. And thank you for...
Like I said, you do your prep, my friend.
Yeah, right?
You do.
So I took my picture off the wall in the lobby. I'm like, screw you. You're not keeping my picture. And then I ended up quitting that job without another job lined up. Now, this is, I think, where I really learned my lesson. So at the time, now I'm married. This is my first wife. We're there in North Carolina, in Charlotte, and I don't have another gig lined up. But she was supportive. She was like, I know you'll get another job. And I knew in my heart I would get another job. So,
right.
So I was confident enough to know that, like, we're going to be fine. So that was the summer of, we didn't have any money. We drained through what little money we had. We actually borrowed money from her sister, like I think $500. And I'm interviewing and trying to, in the meantime, I'm throwing mail for the post office.
Okay.
So it was when UPS, I think, went on strike, right? Was that or was it I'm throwing mail for the U.S. Postal Service.
Right.
Like overnight, working.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
Those flat boxes.
Yeah.
Moving around.
Yeah, so I'm doing that.
Them for the airline.
There you go. So I'm doing that. I think it was for the post office, right? Or was it for? Yeah, it was for the post office. So there's like a strike going on or whatever, wasn't it? Wasn't it UPS or something on strike?
I think so.
So they needed help, and I needed money, and I needed a job, and needed to bring some money in while we're looking for my next gig. So my wife, she goes back to waiting tables, and my ex-wife my ex-wife. So all the while I'm interviewing, trying to find the right gig this time. I'm not going to just take a gig to take a gig. So that's when this job at 97.1 ZHT in Salt Lake City came about, and that was my old program director, Jeff McCartney. Said, hey, look, there's a guy that he is a program director out there. He used to listen to you when you worked at the Big Ape in Brunswick, Georgia, which is just north of, so it's a little market north of Jacksonville in Georgia, just over the state line. He said he's a big fan of yours, and he wants to hire you as the morning host. They're building a show in Salt Lake City, and he wants to hire you. And I was looking to host a gig at this point.
So
I'd
a
never
hosting
hosted.
gig.
Yeah.
You're looking.
Right.
You're ready.
And I remember, like, as I'm interviewing, like, one station is a big top 40 station in Charleston, South Carolina. It's kind of a heritage station. I remember prior to that, the program director was like, I just don't think you're ready. You know, I don't think you're ready to host. And I was like, okay, but I feel like I am. But then, so that job never panned out. But this job in Salt Lake City, he wanted to hire me kind of like sight unseen. And I interviewed with a guy that was with the company, and he was like, you know what? Let's fly him out. Let him at least look at Salt Lake City. So then I had, with this company at the time, which was really cool, they needed a host in Cincinnati at their top 40 station, and they needed one in Salt Lake City. So it was basically my choice. I got a chance to pick what market I wanted to work in. And I thought, well, Cincinnati's like 5 hours south of Detroit. Been there, done that. It's kind of a smaller version of Detroit, you know, right there on the river. And I'm like, I want to see what this Salt Lake City thing is. So I flew out to Salt Lake City, met with the program director, and we both seemed like we were on the same page as far as our vision goes and what he was looking to do and build and what I was looking to do. And this is what I was looking, you know, these are my ideas to build a show and to host a show. And so that was late summer. That was actually September when that, and then it didn't pan out until, like, officially pan out until October. So October or whatever it was of 1997, that's when I officially started at ZHT. And have been there ever since.
And that is big. And I can't explain for people that live out west. Mm-hmm. I moved to Reno and was shocking. And also folks go, Reno, where's that? Mm-hmm. Lake Tahoe, what is that? Utah, even more so. Utah had a little bit of stigmatism to it.
Still does.
Yeah.
Still does.
Absolutely.
Preconceived notions, and I had them going in.
Absolutely.
I didn't know.
So
like,
did I before I moved here.
What is this? You know?
Exactly. And, you know, everybody takes a little grain of truth and runs with it and blows it into a boulder. And, you know, I'm right with you. That's pretty big. You know, Salt Lake City, Utah. Especially with the preconceived notions and with us all being back east, west of the Rockies was unknown territory.
Right.
We knew California. We knew Vegas, maybe.
I'd never been, though. And this was, at that point, this was the...
I hadn't either.
Yeah. When I came out for the interview, that was the furthest I've ever been.
I went to Denver once. That was it. I'd never been in the Rocky Mountains. I'd never been west of St. Louis.
Right.
And I got this interview and flew to Phoenix and interviewed. And next thing I'm in Reno, Nevada. And I'm like, oh, I'm not in Kansas anymore, folks.
Right.
So, wow. And it's obviously you've done well. For the folks that don't know, that aren't your usual audience, you've been near the top or on the top the whole time you've been here. You've got great partners. Jessica is fantastic.
She's awesome.
And it turns out small world time. I met her. We became friends. I moved down to Arizona. I'm living in a neighborhood. I'm walking my dog. I start talking to a lady out in her front yard watering her plants. She says, you know, we just general conversation. And then I said, I moved down from Utah. She goes, oh, my niece lives up in Utah. Oh, really? Well, yeah, she works at the zoo. And I'm thinking, the zoo.
Right. You're thinking the whole zoo.
Yeah, and I'm not even listening. Really, I'm just chatting, making nice conversation. And she said, her name's Jessica, and then radio. And I go, wait. And
she meant the morning zoo.
The morning zoo.
We used to go by. Now it's just Frankie and Jess, but yeah, we used to go by the morning zoo. So that's funny.
Yeah, so it was great.
Small
and that's
world,
where she's from. So yeah, absolutely. So you've been doing fantastic. I love watching what you do, and now even more so in your personal life. How old's Axel now? Axel's his son.
Be coming up on August 30th. So yeah. So
did I jump too far forward?
No, but it's just.
I feel like you pinch yourself often on how good. From when we first got together here in Utah, you were struggling with some health issues, which they got figured out, which was totally not your fault or your body's fault that you were being prescribed some stuff and overprescribed
antibiotic that I'd been on for minocycline for the people. Seriously, every time I mention it, it's amazing how many people are like, "Oh my gosh, I've been suffering from." And that's a well-known fact that this it causes problems. This anyway. So
Yeah.
I was
No, it's great. Get it out
suffering
there.
for a year and a half,
And it was horrible. I was watching it, and it was pain, it was
Terrific.
rashes, it was everything. And these doctors had kept you on antibiotics
Right.
to fix something else they thought you had, and they were testing you for Lyme disease. I just remember watching lupus and everything else, and watching, going, oh my gosh. And
right.
you know, and then to follow up a little on that, I've been dealing with some medical issues of my own, and I went in and said, test me for all this stuff, and they're finding out that you know, it might be a sleep issue.
Right.
So, you know, folks, go get tested, and demand that, you know, is thorough.
Yeah.
But no, you're doing so fantastic, and I love seeing it, and now with Axel and your lovely wife Tammy, and coming to your wedding, and I had a chance to come back for your anniversary show, which was a surprise. Jessica gave me a call, and I came in, and we were here again at 5 a.m. I wish you guys quit doing that. Maybe it could be the afternoon show.
Yeah. Right.
And met some great people on that show, and shout out to the Dream Lady Lori if she's watching this at some time.
Lori from thedreamzone.com.
There you go.
Yeah.
And she has sent me a message saying she'd love to be on my podcast, so we're going to work on that someday soon. And it's just, again, that networking thing, and I couldn't be happier watching you, my friend.
Thanks, man.
It's just, I'm happy to see you happy.
Thank you.
And
Thank
healthy.
You. Appreciate that.
It's good to see friends thrive.
This is and to kind of just go back and maybe tie a little bow on it, but I knew 2 weeks into this gig that I didn't want to go, and working in some bigger markets, you know, and it was only in DC for
Didn't want to go somewhere else?
Didn't want to go somewhere else.
Okay.
And because people, and I think
I thought you meant go to Salt Lake.
No. Like
Yeah.
I didn't know. Like when I first got here, because I didn't know what Salt Lake was all about. I was open to it, but within 2 weeks, it got into my blood, and I thought, you know what? I want to stay here. I want to build a show. I want to build a life, and I don't want to. I knew what we had here, and not only from, you know, what we were doing as a radio station, but as a market, as a state. I mean, just like this connection I had right out of the chute, and I didn't want to lose it. And over the years, we've had chances to go to bigger markets.
Yeah.
And I, you know, there's the pros and cons with anything, and I just remember thinking, you know what? I want to build something where I can retire here, and that's kind of what we're doing. It's like, I don't want to go anywhere, especially now after meeting my wife Tammy, and this is, you know, we've had our little boy here, and we've built a life here, and we're coming up this October. It'll be 21 years that I've been on the air here.
Oh, and you and I have had conversations, being where we're from, Detroit area, train tracks. I grew up next to the switching yard in a little town called Melvindale, right next to Lincoln Park,
which is where my ma grew up.
Okay,
went to the same my ma and Doyle went to the same high school.
And I get out here and I meet my wife's cousin. He takes me rock climbing, and I'm on a rope bridge going across a raging river, and I stop in the middle and I'm just staring, and he's, dude, you know, bro, what are you doing? Get over here,
like,
get over here.
And
I'm like, I didn't grow up here.
Yeah.
I know you're taking this for granted, but this is majestic.
Right.
This is silly how beautiful this is, and the roaring river and everything else.
It's a slice of heaven, and that's the thing, knowing, like, living in other cities, and that's, I think, where we both kind of have that, where when I moved here, I'd lived in all these different cities, and then, you know, being from Detroit or the Detroit area, I knew what was out there, and I knew what this had to offer. So there are pros and cons that come with anything, but you know what? The pros outweigh the cons here.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, so anything that because you're going to find cons wherever you are, and
Yes.
then people that are like, oh, well, there's this, and this. I'm like, yeah, but there's this, and this that you're not going to get in other markets or other cities. So you gotta. So it's that, and I knew early on. I was like 2 weeks into it, like this place.
This is it.
In that 20 plus years, I mean, we've grown. We're pretty progressive. People that we still get the whole, you know, Salt Lake City, Mormons, you know, you get the whole sister wives, you know, whatever, big love. You've got that kind of
how many
negative
wives
connotations.
you had jokes when I lived here all the time.
We'll take that, to me, keeps, because we've grown over the years. Again, we're one of the most progressive cities, believe it or not. You can probably think, oh, whatever. It's true. Compared to other cities, we have, you know, we're very progressive, and we've grown a lot. And I think that kind of weird negative stigma helps kind of keep, because we've grown and it's been good good growth. You know,
Yeah,
it's not like
yeah.
overnight growth.
Good stay out.
Right? Yeah.
That's fine.
It keeps, and it
That's
helps
fine.
kind of buffer, you know.
And I went the same way. And if you go to, I always thought I'd end up in Colorado because my brother's there, and now my sister's there. But my brother was there forever, and I always thought I'd end up there because I love skiing and I loved the winter and the mountains, and I just knew I was going to Colorado someday. I came here, and wait a minute. From that house I bought,
Yeah.
I had a basement office, and I would watch the powder in my basement window, snow, pile up, and I would take off at 11:30 for lunch, and I was skiing by 11:42. I was on the lift.
Right.
And I'd be at the top of a mountain. I'm talking 12, 13, 14,000 feet. I would ski 45 minutes till my legs were burning for lunch, and then back in my office doing my work. Colorado, you start from Denver and try to get up to a ski resort. It's an hour and 20-minute drive, and you try to do that in traffic.
Yeah.
On weekends, it's 6, 7, 8 hours sometimes.
Right.
So convenience, what you have here, and then you go straight south, you're in warmer weather. Immediately, it's high desert here, but you have green, you have water. We like to boat. We had our boat here. So, yeah, absolutely. Folks, stay out, but, you know.
You wouldn't like it here.
No,
If you're not from here or don't have any connections here, it's okay.
Nah.
We want you to visit,
Yeah,
but don't get any ideas.
Give it a shot. See,
Yeah,
see what you think. But, you know, and here we are today. You know, I'm sitting in your cabin up in, am I allowed to say where it is?
Yeah, it's in Timberlake. I talk about it all the time on the air.
Okay.
Because we have a lot of listeners that have places up here, have connections up here, and it's, you know, it's.
Oh, okay. So we're up in Heber, Utah,
Yep.
and came up for the weekend. You decided to do the podcast. I've built out a little thing, and I hate using my own name, but I was told I should. And I have this Doyle-Cast.com. So
I love
I kind of put it all together because Doyle's unusual, and they kept saying, use your name. And I'm still a little self-conscious of that from growing up because everybody was Steve, Joe, Pete, and I felt stupid having a name Doyle. And then as I got older, people were like, oh, cool, you have a different name.
Right.
Now everybody has a different name and spelled every crazy way you could possibly spell it. But so I created this little Doyle-Cast to have some fun with and do some things. But technology has got to the point where I throw this little thing in a backpack like you saw. When I unzipped it, you go, holy crap, is everything in that bag? And it's, yep, everything's there. You know, I put some underwear in my regular bag, but
it's a setup, man. I love it. It's impressive. It really is.
It's thank you. It's a multi-camera setup, and I'm loving it. And I worked hard to get it the right way, and I think we're doing okay. And I appreciate you, my friend, for sitting down and having me in your home tonight, and we'll sit and watch the sunset. Not close together, but together. And
I'm fine with it. I'm
Okay,
secure with
yeah.
it. I'm secure with it. We can sit close.
Okay,
We've known each other since 1987, man.
there you go.
Yeah. Good job, man.
Yeah, thanks, brother, and I appreciate it. And nobody's going to see this because I don't have the third camera set up. I'm going to reach out, shake your hand, and say thank you for being here today. And we're 2 hours, brother.
2 hours.
2 hours.
If you've made it this far, thanks.
Yeah,
Appreciate it. Yeah.
right at you. And if I didn't have to go to the bathroom, I'd say let's go another round.
I know, right? I have to pee, like really
So
bad. I do.
I'm
So
right with you.
it's a one bathroom cabin, so you can take the bathroom. I'm peeing off the deck.
There
Out
you
back.
go, my brother.
Dude.
Thanks, man.
Good job, man.
All right, right back at you. Thank you.
Thanks.